The Tacx Neo 2T Smart Turbo Trainer is one of the best turbo trainers on the market right now, and it is packed full of features which we will cover extensively in this video. For the pricey sum of around £1,100 or $1,276, you get a QR skewer, various adapters to fit different bike types, which we'll try later in this video. You'll also get some washers and spacers, as well as some documents, and of course the power cable. But believe it or not, you can actually run this turbo trainer with no power. We will also look at that later in the video. There is also a front wheel block that comes in the box to keep your bike nice and level. Then you have the turbo trainer itself, which is packed away neatly with its wings folded up. You'll notice that the Tacx Neo 2T doesn't come shipped with a cassette. In my opinion, this does make sense as there are so many variations in sizing and gearing, etc. Although for the price, it may have been nice if they snuck one in there for us. You'll then notice the size and weight of this smart turbo trainer coming in at a whopping 47.3 pounds, which is 21.5 kilograms. This extra weight does make it pretty damn stable though, a big benefit when riding, which you will see later. It also stands pretty tall. It's much larger than something like the Wahoo Kicker Core, and to have the bike level you need to use the front wheel block, which raises you higher than you normally would be compared to the ground. It's kind of like you're floating in the clouds a little bit. Setting up the Tacx Neo 2T is pretty simple. To put the legs down, you simply push them down and then click them into place. It's equally as simple to fold them up. Just release both latches on each leg and then fold it up until it clicks back into place. You can tell that this thing is very well built. With the legs down and the Tacx Neo 2T stable, we can begin installing the cassette. Now firstly, I would make sure that the cassette you are using is the same as the one on your bike. You can use the one on your actual bike if you like, but you will get pretty bored of swapping them pretty damn quick. Trust me, I learned from experience. Now a decent cassette like the Shimano 105 cassette is around £40 or $47, but good luck getting your hands on one though, because these things seem to be like gold dust these days. By default, the 2T has an 11 speed free hub, so if you are using an 11 speed cassette, as I am here, you can slide it straight on without any washers. If you are using a 10, 9 or 8 speed, you will have to install some form of spacer before the cassette goes onto the free hub, and that looks a little bit something like this, with the spacer on first before the cassette. Depending on your cassette will depend on how many spacers or how big a spacer you need, so do check that out and work it out for your particular scenario. Additional bodies for the Shimano 12-speed microspline, Campagnolo, SRAM XDR and SRAM XD cassettes can be purchased from Garmin. Once the cassette is on, you can start the lock nut off by hand. The threads are delicate on the lock nut, so don't force it or you could cross thread. You will need specific tools to tighten the lock nut. A chain whip will be used to grip the cassette and provide opposite tension, a cassette tool that fits your specific cassette, and a wrench, preferably a torque wrench, but if you don't have a torque wrench, an adjustable wrench will do. Grip the cassette with the chain whip, install the cassette tool into the lock ring of the cassette, and then tighten it by applying pressure in one direction with the chain whip and the other direction with the wrench. You'll need to go clockwise to tighten and anti-clockwise to loosen. I'm using a torque wrench here and tightening up to 40 Newton meters, which is the manufacturer's recommended spec. If you don't have a torque wrench, 40 Newton meters is the same as applying 16 kilograms of weight to the end of a 25 centimeter spanner. A vital step is to check that there is no play or wobble in the cassette after you have installed the lock ring. You may also notice at this point that the Tacx Neo 2T doesn't have a flywheel like other smart trainers do. This is because it has a virtual 120 kilogram flywheel, which I actually quite like. They say that this gives you a more realistic ride, like the outdoors. We'll see about that later in the video, and because the flywheel is virtual, there is also no need for calibration, which is another bonus. Just hop on the pony and ride. I must say at this point that the Tacx has a really nice design and it looks and feels high quality. You can tell there is a good build quality to it. The 2T is suitable for rear forks at 130mm, which is basically rim brake road bikes, 135mm, which is mountain bikes and also road disc brake bikes, 142mm and 148mm through axles, and you can also get an adapter for 135 by 10mm. So looking at the adapters, they all screw in to the turbo trainer, which I really like. Now the writing on the adapters is also pretty clear. You have the sizing, and then you have DS, which means drive side, and NDS, which means non-drive side. The drive side being the side with your cassette and chain on. So the right hand side of your bike as you're sat on it. So to install a rim brake road bike, you select the 130mm non-drive side adapter and the QRDS adapter. With all the adapters, start them off by hand and then use a 5mm Allen key to tighten them up. With the adapters installed, grab your bike and put it into the smallest cog at the back on your cassette. So that's your highest gear. Undo the skewer and remove the rear wheel from your bike. Now putting your bike into the smallest cog makes it much easier to remove. You'll thank me later. Now simply place your bike into the turbo trainer. It can take a little bit of getting used to, but it's simple after a few goes. Just remember that the chain needs to go over and under the cassette to route the chain correctly. Now once the bike is installed, make sure that it is seated in the dropouts correctly and then press down on the seat. This is an important step as this will ensure the bike is properly seated. Now you can do up the QR skewer and you are good to go. Now installing a disc brake bike is just as simple. We need to add the correct adapters. For me and my disc brake bike, this is the 135mm non-drive side and the QRDS drive side adapter. They are installed in the same way. Screw them in by hand initially and then tighten them up with a 5mm Allen key. Now placing the bike in the turbo trainer, this is where I notice the clearance issue. You can see just how tight the caliper is on my Giant Defy Advance 1 to the plastic of the Tacx Neo 2T. However, I remember seeing spaces in the box, so a quick Google to look for a solution, and I learned that included in the box is a 2.7mm non-drive side spacer which can be added and used for this situation. So I removed the non-drive side adapter, put the spacer onto the adapter which slid on just like this, then I reinstalled the adapter. This gave an extra 2.7mm of clearance, which was enough to give a little bit of space between the caliper and the turbo trainer. It is still tight though. I also put some electrical tape on the turbo just in case there was any rubbing, but overall it's been okay for a few weeks of riding. There haven't been any issues. If you have a disc brake bike, do check online before you purchase a trainer, make sure there's no issues and your disc brake caliper has clearance. For the Thru axle, we need to change the adapters again. For the non-drive side, we use the DS drive side 12 adapter, and the non-drive side will depend on your rear dropout width. Now when we talk about rear dropout width, we're talking about this distance, the distance between each side of the dropouts. Now for my Thru axle disc brake road bike, I need 142 by 12 on the non-drive side, and I'll start the adapters off by hand again so we don't cross thread them. Then you'll notice the only way that you can do the Thru axle adapter up on the drive side is with these little ridges on the adapter themselves. Now for this you'll need a 17mm cone spanner. Now a cone spanner is a thin spanner that allows you to work when there isn't much space. My normal 17mm spanner cannot get onto the adapter on the drive side once it is screwed in most of the way, as you can see here. On the non-drive side of the turbo trainer, it can be done up with a normal 17mm spanner as there is enough space. Now I'm just going to do that up with my 17mm cone spanner as I have it to hand. Now once the adapters are installed, grab your bike and slide it in place and put the Thru axle through the frame and through the turbo trainer. Tighten the Thru axle to the recommended spec. It will normally say it on the Thru axle, and in my case it is 6 Newton meters. To do this I'm going to use a torque wrench again, which works an absolute dream. So all bikes fit into the turbo trainer, but you may have an issue with your disc brake bike with the clearance on your caliper. If you are enjoying this video so far, do consider tapping the like button. It will help me out in the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe to see more videos like this. Now that our bike is installed in the smart turbo trainer, it's time to connect it with something to record and control the trainer. Now we can do this with Bluetooth or we can do this with AMP+. Both are built into the Tacx Neo 2T. When connecting to a cycle computer, that will likely be AMP+. I find that it gives a better connection than Bluetooth. Simply make sure that the turbo is powered on and then search for the trainer on your GPS. Now the way that you connect your device will vary on the make and model. For me, I simply go into pairing and find the power option, set the GPS to search and wait for it to connect. And there you go, pretty much instantly it connected and found the Tacx Neo 2T turbo trainer power. We also have Bluetooth available on the Tacx, which can be connected to your laptop, PC, iPad, etc. When using Zwift, go to Zwift's pairing screen and wait for the Smart Turbo to be found. Do not go into the Bluetooth settings on your device, your laptop, and try and look for the turbo trainer. If it's not showing up, then you can have a quick spin of the pedals just to wake it up and make sure the turbo trainer is alive. And overall, I will say that AMP+ tends to give a more consistent connection. With AMP+ and Bluetooth, the Tacx Neo Smart Trainer is pretty much compatible with all apps such as Sufferfest, Trainer Road, Zwift, etc. Now, to be honest, unless something is wrong with your turbo trainer, then connecting via Bluetooth and AMP+ should be really simple. It's tried and tested technology, and in my scenario with my sample size of 1, Bluetooth and Amp+, were absolutely fine. Now that we're connected, what can we measure? We can measure power, cadence, and speed. Your power is measured in watts, and you can measure up to 2,200 watts with the Tacx Neo T2, which, unless you inherit the legs from the Hulk for a day, you probably won't get near. We also have a cadence sensor built in, so we can measure the amount of time that our pedals rotate every minute. When using Zwift, our speed is actually calculated from the watts that we produce, plus the gradient of the road and your weight. So it's an estimated virtual measurement. This is how training apps try and make it more realistic from rider to rider. Now, Garmin, who own Tacx, say that the trainer is accurate to plus or minus 1%, which is pretty accurate. Without a comparison that we know is 100% accurate, we will never truly know if that figure is correct. What is more important, in my opinion, is that your trainer is consistent and doesn't have any high and low readings, which we'll look at shortly. We also have left and right power measurements, which I think is a hugely overlooked feature. This allows you to see how much power your left and right legs are producing individually. This will help you to see if there is an imbalance, especially if you look at the data over time. The Tacx is the only turbo trainer on the market to have left and right power balance and show you your power individually for each leg. When riding the Tacx Neo 2T, you will instantly notice the sway that the turbo trainer allows. This is deliberate to give a more realistic feel. Coming from the Wahoo Kicker core, this was instantly noticeable. It felt like I was flapping in the wind like a flag, and this deliberate wobble is even better when you get out of the saddle. It's more realistic and it's more friendly on your body, as you are not fighting a completely static bike. Uphill, the trainer can tackle gradients of up to 25%. Not that many virtual hills have this sort of gradient, but if they do, you're covered. Once you've reached the peak of that uphill, on the downhill, the Tacx Neo 2T has downhill assist, which means there is a little motor in there working hard to replicate downhill inertia. There are a lot of features to try and make you feel like you're riding outdoors. Maybe we should just be riding outdoors. What you do notice is the way the Tacx Neo 2T can mimic different road surfaces. For this, I swapped from Zwift to the Tacx training app, which has a section where you can test all the surfaces. The first thing to simulate was a cattle grid. And to be honest, it felt like I hit a cow, let alone go over a cattle grid that stops them walking. The vibrations were pretty intense. The same can be said for the big cobbles. I honestly don't know how long you could ride with those vibrations. You can adjust the road feel percentage though to lessen the impact using the percentage slider in the Tacx app. You can normally turn this on and off as well in games like Zwift. Certain gravel road feel was actually pretty good and not as impactful as cobbles, for example. What I would say with the road feel is you feel it more through your feet and not your seat and hands. I guess it's because it's adjusting the resistance on the virtual flywheel, which affects your drive chain. So for example, over the cobbles, I felt the vibrations in my feet, not my arse. The bricks felt very similar to the gravel, just a little bit more consistent, and the ice oddly felt super realistic. It basically mimics your back wheel slipping out. I've done many erg mode workouts with Bluetooth and Amp+. I noticed that keeping a steady wattage was a little difficult with the Tacx Neo 2T. You can see that the power was jumping slightly above the desired wattage and then slightly below. This just continued. I thought it was maybe displaying the instant power rather than the 3-second average. It wasn't, so that wasn't the cause. Here you can see side by side the same ride on the Kicker core versus Tacx Neo 2T. The Kicker has a dead steady line and doesn't fluctuate. The Tacx is jumping up and down a little. Now, a quick Google and it seems that the Kicker smart trainers have power smoothing built in. This keeps the reading consistent with Zwift and it explains why there is no variation. I looked for the same setting on the Tacx, but I couldn't find it. So I guess you just live with those fluctuations. If the Tacx is more realistic, then this will force you to have a smoother pedal stroke instead of being artificially smoothed out. Overall, the trainer seemed accurate. It's hard to know when you don't have something to compare it to that you know is 100% accurate. But what I look for is consistency and making sure there are no highs and lows in the power data that is transmitted. Now, from what I can see, and from my experience in game, there have been no dropouts and no random peaks or spikes. Yes, there was a fluctuations, but overall the average over a segment in erg mode, for example, it looks pretty good. For example, this interval should have been 250 watts average, and when you take that average over that interval time of 4 minutes, you can see that we're pretty much bang on. And the same for the next interval, which was 260 watts for 4 minutes. Again, pretty damn good. So overall, it measures the power, it does it consistently. What more can you ask for? On the topic of power, you can actually run the Tacx Neo 2T without plugging it in. I know, right? Pretty cool that the power you produce is then used to run the turbo. Now, I tried this and it worked flawlessly. Connecting to Zwift with Bluetooth worked straight away, and the trainer didn't drop signal even when I stopped pedaling for around 10 seconds or so. The road feel was working as normal. I thought that wouldn't work when there was no power in, but it did, and it was working well. The downhill assist doesn't work though, but that's a minor point, to be honest. Love it or hate it or feel like it's a gimmick, I think that it's a great feature. Garmin claim that the Tacx Neo 2T is virtually silent, however you can always hear your drive chain. One thing that I will say though is this turbo trainer seems super smooth. It's just a sample size of one, but the virtual flywheel, which uses magnets, creates a smoother ride when you compare to the turbo trainer that has a lot of moving parts, in my opinion. Let's do some sound samples so you can see. So here it is at 100 watts. Here it is at 200 watts. Here it is at 300 watts. 400 watts. And a sprint. So is it worth buying? That is the big question. I'm always a little conflicted when reviewing these products. I honestly think they're great. I love the features, what they allow you to do, the ride quality, and even the style of the damn thing. But you won't pick one up for less than £1,000, $1,200. So is it worth purchasing one? Yes, if you have the money. Otherwise, would you be better off going for something like the Wahoo Kicker Core, which is basically half the price at around £600, £650. Now the ride quality is great. You can ride it without powering it on. There is downhill assist. It does mimic road feel. There is no calibration. The list of features go on. So I have to say I would definitely recommend the Tacx Neo 2T. It's probably the best turbo trainer on the market. Maybe it's better suited to a very keen indoor cyclist or racers or people who spend a lot of time on the turbo trainer. However, it's also suited to people who like expensive cycling things, which is pretty much all cyclists. So if you have the dollar, I guess you won't be disappointed.